إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة العالمين سيدنا مولانا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. تركنا محجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك. ثم أوصيكم نفسي والمذنبة بتقوى الله كما أمرنا الله عز وجل في كتابه العزيز حيث يقول: يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم إن زلزلة الساعة شيء عظيم يوم ترونها تذهل كل مرضعة عما أرضعت وتضع كل ذات حمل حملها وترى الناس سكارى وما هم بسكارى ولكن عذاب الله شديد. وبعد, all praises due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord and Sustainer of the universe. We beseech and implore Him to forgive our mistakes and our sins, and to offer His most salient blessings and salutations upon His last and final Prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his kin, his companions, and all those who follow his guidance to the last day. He has left for us a clear, pristine path. Its day is as its night, and all those who ever from it will find nothing but destruction. Walead. So this is the last Friday, the last Jumu'ah in the blessed month of Rajab, the one that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam described as Rajab al-Fard or Rajab al-Asam. This is the singular month that is amongst the Shahr al-Haram, in other words the Muharram months, which in pre-Islam were the months where no fighting was allowed between the various Arabian tribes. And this tradition continued on after Islam, and the Prophet ﷺ attached a special significance to this month, the month of Rajab. It was the month that the Prophet ﷺ ascended to heaven and through the seven heavens via his Mi'raj, the ascension, and in the same night it was Laylat al-Isra, the night of the Prophet ﷺ night journey from Mecca to Bayt al-Maqdis or al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. And so when the Prophet ﷺ was asked about the next month, Sha'ban, and many of the Sahaba mentioned that they did not see the Prophet ﷺ doing more fasting in any month besides Ramadan, obviously, except for Sha'ban. He was asked about it. He said, this is the month that lies between Rajab and Ramadan, and it's the month that most people يَغْفُلُونَ عَنْهُ, that most people don't pay much attention to. And so one of the principles that we have within the deen, that the ibadah fi zaman al-ghafla, that when one worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when otherwise people may not be attentive to ibadah, to devotional acts, carries a special significance. Such, for example, is the significance of prayer at night. Praying at night specifically versus during the day. Why? Because it's zaman ghafla. It's a time when people are not especially attentive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the Prophet ﷺ assigned a special type of reward for people who would be doing this when no one else can see them, when other people are not very attentive, but nevertheless they're more attentive. And one can make an argument that the very time period we're living in now, this zaman that we're in now, is a zaman of ghafla. It's a time of forgetfulness. It's a time of inattentiveness. It's a time of people being busy with satiating their own personal lower passions and desires at the destruction of their souls. And if you are able to hold on to your deen in this time that we're living in now, for the Prophet ﷺ, he said there will come a time that the one who will be holding on to his deen will be like the one in Masik ala Jamra, the one who's holding on to a hot coal of fire. In other words, it will be difficult. It might be painful, because when you hold on to a coal of fire, you will get burnt. It will be painful. It will change you. It may disfigure you, right, to other people who are looking at you and watching you. But nevertheless, al-Masik, the one who is holding on to his deen, nonetheless, in this particular time, this is the one that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, right? This is the one that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned as ashtaqtu ila ikhwani. These are the brothers that I have longed to meet. And when the companion said to the Prophet ﷺ, alasna ikhwanak ya Rasulullah, are we not your brothers, ya Rasulullah? He said, la, antum ashabi. You are my companions, but my ikhwan, my brothers, and it means brothers and sisters, will be the ones who come after you, who don't have anyone to help them, who will be almost alone, because the companions have the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But most of us are alone. And so we live in a time of alienation. We live in a time of rapid narcissism, egoism, individualism. And this is something that is affecting many, many people, Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And so it is vitally important that we hold on to our deen during this time. And despite what we see happening around us, the door to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always open. It's never closed. It's not closed for a particular place. It's not closed for particular people. But it's something that is always open. And so, as long as we raise our hands, open palm to the sky, then that path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that path to the heavens, will always be open. We just have to seek it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accords us many, many opportunities. We are on the verge of the blessed month of Sha'ban, oftentimes referred to as the month of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And then after that, the month of Allah, Ramadan. And so these next 2 months are blessed times. These next 2 months, Allah accords us the opportunity to perhaps make up for all of the laziness, the inattentiveness, the lack of enthusiasm, the lack of commitment that we may have shown in all the previous months since the last Ramadan. But now we have a chance to make that up. And it's no coincidence that perhaps it coincides with spring in this year. And so just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us signs in the Kitab, right, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He shows us signs in Kitab al-Kawn, in the book of creation. So as we see spring blooming and we see the plants and the trees that were dead during winter, and now they are being irrigated by Allah's blessings from the sky, and they grow and they bloom into this month and the next month, so is the state of the believer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to grow and to bloom, and He accords us these opportunities by which we can do so. But we have to seek it, we have to make the commitment. Many times I'm asked by people, and they say, how do I know how I'm doing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You know, how do I know where I stand with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do I know that He's pleased with me, or that I should be doing something different? And many people misinterpret their circumstances as a sign of Allah's pleasure or displeasure with them. They see that loss in life, loss of wealth, loss of profit, loss of job, any of those things, they take them to be a sign perhaps of Allah's displeasure. And perhaps they interpret gain in wealth, gain in profit, some other type of worldly gains, promotion at work, as a sign of Allah's pleasure. If that were the case, how can we say that Allah is displeased with all of our brethren, all of our brothers and sisters, all over the world, who have committed no sin, except that they say Allah? And that nevertheless they're persecuted, they're destroyed, they're bombed from above, their homes are destroyed, their countries are destroyed, their cities are destroyed. When they cross close to their border and they stay in a refugee camp, that is destroyed as well. How can we say that that's a sign of the displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It cannot be. The sign of the pleasure or displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, where do you stand with the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Where do you stand with His prohibitions? Your ability to follow those commands, your ability to follow and pray and fast and pay the zakat and pay the sadaqat and show good relations to all of those around you, especially those who have rights upon you. Your ability to do those things are by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also we are commanded to do them. Right? Allah doesn't command us to seek our own provision. نحن نرزقكم والعاقبة للتقوى وأمر أهلك بالصلاة واصطبر عليها. That's what Allah commands to. Command you and yourselves and your families to prayer. واصطبر عليها. Right? Have this istibar or sabr. Have this forbearance and this steadfastness. Do not let anything deter you from that. When Ibrahim alayhi salam was ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to leave his young wife Hajar and his young son Ismail in the valley of Mecca, بِوَادٍ غَيْرِ ذِي زَرْعٍ عِنْدَ بَيْتِكَ الْمُحَرَّمِ, right? In a valley that had no vegetation, that had no provision, that had no means, that had no sustenance. What was the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam? What was the first thing that he asked for? رَبِّي يُقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ. Rabbi, O Lord, so that they may establish the prayer. Let them not forget the prayer, even in this very difficult circumstance that they find themselves in. Right? Then he said, تَأْوِي إِلَيْهِمْ أَفْئِدَةٌ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. Then after that, the Af'idah, the group of people from the Bani Jurhum, from that tribe came to find them. But not before Sayyidah Hajar, alayhi salam, right, went back between the Safa and Marwa, seeking provision, right, between those two things. Perhaps something would come about. And that's when the well of Zamzam sprout forth. And now the well of Zamzam still remains till this day as one of the secrets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is the spring that never goes away. It is a spring that is continuous. It is a spring that no matter how much you bring from it, it still has more to give. Much in the way of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The khaza'in al-Rahman, right, the provisions of al-Rahman never run dry. They are forever. There is not a ledger of accounting for the blessings of al-Rahman. It's not taken into account. You will not be asked about, did you receive too many blessings, but how did you use those blessings? Did you put them to good use? Right? Did your relative prosperity and your health and your ease of life, how did you use those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you? Did you follow His command, or did you ignore it? Or did you think perhaps in a later day, perhaps next year, perhaps the year after that, perhaps when I've accomplished all I want to accomplish, perhaps when I have X amount of money in my checking account, then I'll concentrate on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't wait, because tomorrow is not promised for you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wajib, has an obligation upon you every single moment of your life. In other words, if you wait to fulfill those things, that means you've neglected those things you're supposed to do right now, because there are new obligations that come later. Why are all of our obligations time-bound? Right? That Salāt kana mu'mina kitaban mawquta. Right? It is a book that has been written by time, via time. So we have 5 prayers spaced throughout the day. It is not valid to delay all of the prayers to the end of the day and pray all of them at the end of the day. It is not valid to fast a month of Ramadan in other than Ramadan. It is not valid to pay the zakah in other when its time is due. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, right, that via these particular times is a way that we may know Him, is a way that we may reach Him. So if we're neglectful, if we're remiss in something that we're supposed to be doing right now, don't think that that can actually be made up. Technically, you cannot make it up. Even if you miss prayers, you miss fasting, Allah allows us the opportunity by which we can make up in a sense. But really that makeup is to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are still committed, despite our past mistakes, despite our past sins. But it doesn't absolve us of that initial responsibility that we had in the beginning. So don't wait, don't delay. Don't say that I am busy now and I'll get to it later. You will always be busy. This is one of the delusions of shaitan. He will make you think that you're always too busy to do something, that there's too much to do, that you have too many other more important obligations. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us not to busy ourselves too much with seeking our provision. Right? What He does tell us to be busy with, وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا نَحْنُ نَرْزُقُكُمْ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلتَّقْوَى. Don't be busy with this rizq, with this provision, this sustenance. It's guaranteed to you. So if it's guaranteed to us, why do we busy ourselves so much with that aspect? And we neglect the aspect of praying and commanding others to pray. Right? We make our tafweed, we have acquiescence, and we say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Ghafur Rahim, He is bigger than, taking me into account to this mistake here, or this mistake there, and so forth. But when we wake up in the morning, and it's time to go to work, we don't say, well, it's okay if I come an hour late. The boss he's bigger, he'll understand that, why would he take me into account of that? We don't say that about our worldly life. But yet we attribute such remiss and negligence and make excuses for ourselves in our life of the akhirah, the spiritual life. Right? I'm not saying it should be the opposite. I'm not saying that you remiss in your commitment to your work. But at the same time, at least give your spiritual life a similar level of commitment. Don't be any less remiss. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Ghafur Rahim. And yes, Rahmatuhu wasi'at kulla shay. Right? And His mercy has encompassed everything. But la tattakilu. Right? When Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu was riding on the back of the donkey with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the horse, or the mule, right? And he told Ibn Mas'ud, do you know that there's the one thing that if people say it, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enter them into paradise? And he said, what is that, Ya Rasulullah? As long as they say La ilaha illallah. But he told them, don't tell people Don't tell people right now. أَلَّا يَتَّكِلُوا. Otherwise they will only depend upon this and they will not work. Right? They will not have the proper adab and etiquette with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, His rahmah, His mercy is beyond what any of us can imagine, what any of us can fathom. And the blessings that are yet to come in this month and the next, you will see that if you seek it. But be the person who worships Allah thankfully. Be the person who worships Allah gracefully, right, with gratitude. أَفَلَا أَكُنْ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. Strive and struggle, even though for the Prophet ﷺ all was guaranteed. Not just his worldly sustenance, but the sustenance of the next life. But that didn't deter him from worshipping Allah to show Him by gratitude, by thankfulness. And so, despite what you may think are all of the circumstances that have been arrayed or stacked against us, nevertheless we have much, much to be thankful for. And use these blessed times. Use the month of Sha'ban. If you have the ability to fast a few days in Sha'ban, following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, then do so. Prepare yourself for Ramadan. You want to be in a position when Ramadan comes around that you're hitting the ground running. Not that you have to start from the very beginning. So do some days of fasting. If you're planning to do a khatam or finishing the Quran once during Ramadan, why don't you do one in Sha'ban? That may start tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Begin there. And then when you get to Ramadan, you'll be to the second one, and perhaps the third. Right? Because the idea behind these ibadat, the idea behind these blessed months, is to transform you. It's not a one-stop sale occasion that you do once in the year and then you forget the rest of the year. The idea is for you to sustain you so that you establish these good practices, these good devotions during these blessed times, and you continue them. Think about last Ramadan. What did you do last Ramadan? What were the things that you were doing? How many of those things do you continue to do them now? And if the answer to that, well, most of them I don't do, then did Ramadan have the effect it's supposed to have on you? Did it transform you? Right? Because that's something, if you don't allow it to do that, you've missed much of the great thing that can be of that Ramadan. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر لكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه فإنه تائب من ذنب كمن لا ذنب له. الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا عدوان على الظالمين ولا عاقبة للمتقين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So these blessed months of Sha'ban, of Ramadan, that will follow, then Shawwal, and Dhul-Qa'dah, Dhul-Hijjah, we enter into the Shuhur al-Muharramah, the prohibited months. So we're entering into a cycle of months, we're into a cycle of time where perhaps the amal, perhaps the deeds that we do during these times, they will be multiplied in a manner that we can't even fathom. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Hadith al-Qudsi, الصِّيَامُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ. Fasting is for me and I reward it according to whatever I see fit. So the natural default state of our deeds, our good deeds, أَنَّ الْحَسَنَةَ بِعَشْرَةِ أَمْثَالِهَا. That the hasana, the good deed, is worth 10. Right? And that was established during Rajab, during the night of Al-Isra wal-Ma'raj, when the prayer became obligatory upon Muslims via the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when it was originally set out to be 50 prayers, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His ease and gentleness, allowed it only to be 5, with each one counting as 10, thus equaling 50. But the fasting itself counts up to 10, 17, 700, even more in another hadith. And the reason that it's so valuable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He said in the hadith, الصِّيَامُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ. It is for me. Right? Fasting is for Allah. You can't really show off with fasting. People can't see you fast unless you tell them, hey, look, I'm fasting. You can show off with prayers, you can show off with how much money you give. These are things that people usually have competition, mubaha. But fasting is something that cannot be seen. So that means the ibadah fi sir, right? Worship in secret is more transformative than worship in public. In other words, if you are quite enthusiastic about worshiping in public and being part of very public events, but yet when you go home, when you retire to your house, when you retire to your bedroom, or whatever room in your house, and you are less enthusiastic, you don't feel like picking up the mushaf and reading, unless you're in a group with people, or praying unless you're in a group with people, you have to question what is your motivation, right? You have to question that if you cannot establish al-ibadah fi sir, then how valuable, how important, how accepted is your ibadah fil alam, when you do your ritual acts in front of people. So your sarira should be better than your alaniya. That which you do in private should be better than that which you do in public, right? Because that which you do in private is closer to ikhlas, it's closer to sincerity, it's closer to doing it solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't say that we don't do ibadah in public, we do. It's a way of encouragement of others, it's a way to establish the deen in a public way, it's important. But unless you have something of your own, right, that is specific to you, that is your khususiyya, right, that you keep private and to yourself, and that's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, this is the lifeblood of the believer. This is what makes you who you are. This is what made the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ who he was. His ibadah in private was much, much more than his ibadah in public. In fact, in public he would do it probably to a minimum level, because he did not want to overburden the people. He did not want to put something upon them that they would not be able to repeat in the same way or emulate him in the same way. So even when he was praying and he heard a child crying in the background, he would shorten his prayer. When one of the Sahaba, Mu'adh, prayed a long prayer, one of the obligatory prayers, he rebuked Mu'adh. He said, "Afattanan anta ya Mu'adh? Are you trying to cause fitna, ya Mu'adh, with this long prayer? You have people behind you who are old, who are infirm, who are unable to stand for that long. If you want to do that, do it in private." Right? And when he sent Mu'adh and Sayyidina Ali for da'wah to Yemen, he said, "Yassira wa la tu'assira." Right? وَبَشِّرَا وَلَا تُنَفِّرَا. Make ease, facilitate. Do not make things difficult for people. Right? And bashir. Right? Give people hope. Right? Be hopeful in the way that you invite people to Islam. Right? Show glad tidings. Be smiling. Don't threaten them. Right? Don't threaten people with ibadah. Don't threaten people with the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Give them hope. Right? Bashira wala tunaffira. Don't push them away. Right? So when you cultivate an ibadah as-sir, when you cultivate the ibadah in secret, right, it will make you a more powerful inviter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not just by what you say, but by who you are, the way you act, the way that you deal with people, the way that they look upon you when you greet them. These are things that will lighten you, right? And what I mean by light, they will give you nur, right? They'll give you a type of luster to you, an internal one, that comes out, right? You see the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they have this light about them. They have this ease about them that can be in the most difficult circumstances, but yet they will greet people with a smile. They will not complain, right? They will not object to the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to anything that befalls them in terms of circumstances. This is the power of Islam, and this is the power of Iman. Our power is not in our numbers, it's not in the weapons we may or may not possess, it's not in any of those things. It's not in our ethnicities or the clothes that we wear or the food that we cook or any of those things. Our power is an internal spiritual power, and we've neglected it far long enough. We need to return back to those usul, to those principles of establishing ibadah in your house, establishing taqwa in our homes first and foremost. Because believe me, if we can't do it in our house, if we can't do it when we're alone, in private, we will not do it on a bigger scale. You will not do it in the masjid. You will not do it in Lancaster. You will not do it in Eastern Pennsylvania. We will not do it in the United States. We have many, many challenges arrayed against us and still forthcoming. We will not be able to meet those challenges unless every single one of us draws upon their own internal spiritual fortitude. And then we bring that all together. Because when we bring that all together, right, it's exponentially multiplied. It's not a linear relationship, it's exponential. And then when all of us bring that together, you will be surprised, you will be aghast about the challenges that we're able to meet. But it begins, right, with the seed that we plant at home. It begins with the seed you plant within yourself. It begins with the seed you plant with your family, with your children, with your wife, with your husband. You need to change. You need to transform your home before we can transform society. And in order to transform your home, you need to transform yourself. And every day Allah gives us an opportunity to do that. If you didn't do it yesterday, if you didn't contribute a little bit to that transformation, there's always tomorrow. But you need to start. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue to bless us in the remaining hours of Rajab, and to bless us in Sha'ban, and to give us the life so that we may reach the month of Ramadan, and that we may be of the people of fasting, we may be the people of Taraweeh, we may be the people of Sadaqat. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lift the burden and tribulations upon all our brethren, wherever they may be, in our Sham, in our greater Syria, in our Yemen, in Iraq, in Palestine, in Africa, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in the United States, in South America, and all the places where the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is raised, and the name of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is mentioned. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما باركت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته وقل